This presentation is about the pathways that sensory and motor information take throughout the body. First, we will talk about what is called the somatic sensory pathways, those that carry information about the skin and muscles. There are two, usually three, neurons involved in this pathway. The first order neuron goes from the receptor, such as a free nerve ending, to the spinal cord. These are the unipolar neurons whose cell bodies are located in the dorsal root ganglion. From there, the second order neuron carries the information up the spinal cord to the thalamus or cerebellum. The cell body of this neuron is in the gray matter of the spinal cord. And if there is a third order neuron, its cell body is in the thalamus, and it will carry the information up to the sensory cortex of the cerebrum, where the sensation becomes a perception. On the sensory cortex, there is an uneven distribution of sensations. This creates what is called the sensory homunculus, or a man-like image, whose body parts are proportional to the number of receptors devoted to that body part. So, based on this picture, you can see that the largest number of receptors are going to be in the hands, lips, and tongue, with only a small number of receptors for the legs and feet. There are three main sensory pathways: the spinothalamic, spinocerebellar, and posterior column pathways. Keep in mind that sensory pathways are ascending pathways. Sensations are going from the peripheral nerves to the central nervous system and up to the brain. The name of the spinothalamic and spinocerebellar give away which direction the fibers are traveling. The spinothalamic pathway can be divided into anterior and lateral pathways. The anterior spinothalamic pathway carries the sensations of crude touch and pressure. The lateral spinothalamic pathway carries pain and temperature sensations. The posterior column pathway carries fine touch, pressure, vibration, and proprioception. The spinocerebellar pathway carries only proprioceptive information. This is a picture of the posterior column pathway, and it gives you an idea that this red neuron here, there's the cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. This is the first order neuron coming in from the exterior or the peripheral nervous system. And then the second order neuron is this white neuron, and see that the cell body is in the gray matter. And then it goes up through the midbrain. It will go to the thalamus, and then here is the sensory cortex for the third order neuron. Here we discuss the somatic motor pathways that control the skeletal muscle of the body. There are two neurons involved in this pathway, the upper and lower motor neurons. The upper motor neuron cell body is in the central nervous system processing center, which is usually the motor cortex. This travels to the brainstem or spinal cord and synapses with the lower motor neuron. The second neuron then carries motor commands to the skeletal muscles. There is a motor homunculus on the motor cortex. This time, the body parts are proportional to the number of motor units innervated by that region of the motor cortex. So, in this image, there are a large number of motor units for the face, specifically the tongue and the lips. There are three motor pathways that are descending pathways. These are the corticospinal pathway, the medial and lateral pathways. The corticospinal pathway travels from the cerebral cortex to the skeletal muscles and carries the voluntary commands to skeletal muscles there. The medial pathway controls the muscle tone and gross movements of the trunk and proximal limbs, like the shoulder and the hip. The lateral pathway controls muscle tone and precise movements of the distal limb, such as the fingers. This is an image of the corticospinal pathway, and the pathway starts here. It is a descending pathway. So this is the upper motor neuron in the red, and then it travels down through, this is the midbrain, medulla oblongata, and then it goes to the spinal cord. Then this white neuron is the lower motor neuron, and then that will go out to the skeletal muscles. Sometimes people can experience something called referred pain. This is when there is pain in a body part that is not the actual source. The source is usually a visceral organ, and the pain is perceived in the skin or muscles. For example, when a person is having a heart attack, their left shoulder and arm usually hurt. Or sometimes stomach problems can appear as pain between the shoulder blades.